The rate of suicides increasing in the United States, and sadly, Corpus Christi is following that trend. With September being National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, we sat down with a local psychiatrist to talk about ways to prevent suicides. John Lucens is a doctor at the Bayview Behavioral Hospital. He sees patients who struggle with suicidal thoughts and says there are signs to look out for. If your loved one talks about harming themselves, isolates themselves, or shows signs of depression and irritability, they could be potentially suicidal. Lucen says the first step to helping someone who struggles with suicidal thoughts is simple.
In these types of situations, it's best to listen because that's what they're wanting you to do. After that, talk to them that it's okay, we can get you some help.
If you or someone you know is thinking of committing suicide, call 911 or the National Suicide Hotline at this toll-free number, 800-273-8255.